in welcoming to the stage Director Berg, please. Thank you for sticking around for the Q&A. And Berg, congratulations. I said this in the intro, that this is a tremendous film, and also your other new film, Slaying the Dragon, which is playing at AFI Docs. Both are, I said 2019 was the year for Berg.
It's great to have them both come out. They actually finished on the same day, so there you go.
That's great. Very different films. Back in the lobby, you were telling me that making this one was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So maybe, first of all, tell us how you came to the project, or maybe the project came to you?
Yeah, more the latter, I think. So the origins of the project actually started with American Experience on PBS. My executive producer, Mark Samuels, had the idea. I knew the 50th anniversary was coming up, and had a sense that, that there is a great film already made about this subject, but that there was room for a new one. That film really is a concert film and hadn't really even tried to explain what Woodstock is. So he thought, there was an opportunity to do something else. And he also had an instinct that there would be footage of the event in the crowd. The crowd was the story to him, and he just had this instinct that Warner Brothers was probably sitting on some outtakes from the original film, and it turned out to be correct.
So talk a bit about that footage, about the Warner Brothers footage, and how you sort of got the rights, and the process of sifting through all of it, and then integrating it with all the other footage.
That was the one non-joyful part of this experience. It's a great story to be told about the making of the original documentary. The people who made the original film were similar to the organizers of the event in that they were young, had no real business doing this. They just took a flyer. They basically said to themselves, we're going to shoot this, and something will happen. So they did it very smartly. They brought a bunch of crews up there, and what was great for us is that they put 3 of those crews in the audience, and basically just said, shoot the audience for the entire duration of the festival, get on your motorcycles, just go around shooting it. So you can see glimpses of that footage in the original documentary. You can see, the glimpses of the audience here and there. So we asked Warner Brothers, this is before I even came on, what do you have? I mean, there must be more. And at first they were sort of cagey, we're not really sure what we have. Anyway, we're not sure we want to give it to you. We have our own film, we have our own plans for the 50th. There's a very long process of talking to them. When it's finally started to come to us, and we still didn't know how much they had, it all came without sound. There was no sound on it, it was upside down, it was out of order. It took about a month for us to put all the shots in the right chronology, the right geography in the festival, and ultimately they, to their credit, and we're very grateful, they gave us 35 hours of outtakes that had never been seen. They didn't even know they had it until they started, going through their own basement archive.
And was that the starting point, or had you already started doing interviews?
We had started doing interviews on faith. We thought maybe we could assemble enough footage from other sources to make a film, but really we needed this footage. I mean, this is a unique archive. So it started, but we hadn't fully committed to the film at that point. About a third of the interviews you hear in the film are not ones that we did. We got an oral history done about 20 years ago. Many of the voices in this film are from people who are no longer with us. So we needed that, sort of archive. So it's part of the reason we didn't do any on-camera interviews is we had these oral histories that we needed to supplement, but it was a good start for the film.
And what kind of pushed you over talk a bit more about your artistic practice in terms of coming to that realization, we're not doing any on-camera talking heads, we're going to shoot very little original footage.
Once we saw the archive, it was kind of a no-brainer. We wanted to have this immersive experience. We wanted to put people in that audience. We thought that breaking away to the faces of 75-year-old ex-hippies would be distracting somewhat. And
no offense.
No offense. And once we saw what we had, it was sort of a no-brainer. We just wanted. And the other thing was that, weirdly, the interviews that we did with folks ended up sounding a lot alike. People had a very similar experience, a very profound and deep experience, but not one where the individuals were very differentiated from each other. It felt almost like the voice of the crowd, like one voice. And so that also contributed to the sense that we just wanted this to be kind of, everybody's unified experience rather than showing individuals and trying to make characters out of them.
So, one slightly inappropriate question, it'll be my only one, which is how old are you?
I'm 55. I was
Okay.
6 years old at the time.
Gotcha. So, that brings me to this question, which is, you were 6 years old. This is, I'm assuming you were not there. But more to the point, as with the case for me and a lot of other people, like Woodstock is something that we've experienced through the movie Woodstock, through countless books and clips and other documentaries and so on. Like, what were sort of your beginning assumptions about Woodstock, and how did the process of doing the interviews and doing the research maybe challenge some of those assumptions?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I thought Woodstock was all about the music. And it is largely about the music, but there were a lot of great concerts. It's not because of the concert that Woodstock is Woodstock. So that was a surprise and a revelation, sort of the story of what happened out in the crowd, the nearness of disaster, the sort of obstacles they kept encountering and overcoming. All that was fresh for me. The four organizers, two of whom I got to know pretty well, their stories, no idea that a bunch of 23, 24-year-olds tried to do this and ultimately succeeded, but only after a lot of pain and agony. So all that whole side of the story, basically what happened out in the crowd, was completely unknown to me, and I think to a lot of people, which is why we did this film.
Let's go to the audience for some questions. We'll start up here.
Brock, it's one of the most incredible documentaries I've ever seen. I've actually saw it twice. I saw it 2 days ago. And I'm moved twice because it's not about the music. It was about 400,000 people getting along that today would never, ever happen. It's a landmark for all the world, and I'm a little older than you. I had the chance to go. It's a regret that a friend of mine asked me, I didn't go. But I felt like I was there. And I like the decision, I love the decision that at the end you didn't put an epilogue on how much the organizers lost. But that makes me curious. How much did they take a loss, or did they actually people contribute in the end?
So let's just repeat questions. It's not. I don't want to assume everyone can hear the questions or comments. First of all, he loved the film. Second time seeing it, but the question is really a little bit different, which is how much did the organizers lose, or did they make their money back, or how much did they make?
So this is a great story as well. And we know this from Joel Rosenman, who's been at a bunch of screenings, has been asked that question a number of times. So what ended up happening is that when the concert ended, they were about $1.5 million in debt. In fact, on Monday, while others were listening to Jimi Hendrix, John Roberts and Joel Rosenman were in New York at a bankruptcy proceeding where a bunch of creditors were surrounding the table, threatening them with lawsuits. So again, all these little heroic moments in the story. Another one happened here. John's dad and brother stepped forward and guaranteed all of the debts for their brother, so he wouldn't have to go into bankruptcy. And then, miraculously, they discovered about $1 million in ticket receipts that they hadn't collected all across the country, in little ticket offices around the country. So that brought them closer. And then they sold their share of the documentary for $1 million to Warner Brothers, which at the time they thought was unbelievable that they got $1 million. Warner Brothers made $80 million off the movie. So you ask Joel today, and he sort of winces at that. But what Joel says is it took them to the end of the 70s to break even, and ever since they've slowly been making a little bit of money. They haven't ever reaped a giant, reward, but they're doing fine.
A lot more questions, so we're going to just kind of go around and end up back in the front. Go ahead.
You said there were an oral history that you worked with, and who took that, and where was that?
Question is about the oral histories and who did that and where did you find it?
So there's a guy named Joel Mackauer he's just a buff. He lives on the West Coast. He decided to do this about 20 years ago, and he did an incredible job. He interviewed every musicians, the organizers, everybody, and he wasn't intending to tape it, but he decided to do that as part of his research. And the tape was good enough that we could use, and he was incredibly generous to us, just sort of like gave it to us. And thank goodness, because we wouldn't have John Roberts, we wouldn't have a ton of people in the film otherwise.
The pre-podcast era. Right here. Yeah, go ahead, and then behind this guy here, and then you. Go ahead, guy in front. Go ahead. Pop. Yeah, go.
I want to thank you for, I was there, and I want to thank you for making this movie because I've been trying to explain to people how it wasn't just a concert that we went to, it was a whole experience. And there was one scene that I'll never forget. We were camping probably about a couple of miles from the area where the performers were, and walking down the road, and the phone company had set up a table with soup for the people walking by, and they were just giving out soup for free. And we had never seen the phone company give away something.
So this was just an anecdote. This man was at Woodstock and was wandering around and stumbled upon the phone company table giving away free soup. Did you find that in your research?
Not that particular story, that's new to me, but there's something infectious about the spirit of the thing. I mean, I'm very touched by the townsfolk around the festival who really are conservative Republicans to this day, and we're very wary of this festival to begin with. And actually, we're not always so. After the festival, Max Yasgur took a lot of grief for several years, but at that moment, they stepped forward, as you saw, and fed the stranger, as they put it. But it's something about this event summoned these kinds of amazing acts of generosity.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I really liked how you talked about what Wavy Gravy and the Hog Farm was doing, and that's like a story that you don't hear as much about either. Did you seek that out, or did that also just come to you in the footage?
Stories about Wavy Gravy and the police force.
Well, it's sort of unavoidable when you're telling the story, but a total surprise to me. I mean, I'd heard of Wavy Gravy, mostly from the ice cream flavor, but what a remarkable human being. And he is the same person today as he was then, and all the years in between. If you go out to the Bay Area, he's sort of a deity, he's sort of a saint, and with good reason. I mean, he walks the walk. He's lived those values and those ideals ever since, which is pretty commendable.
So there are books about Woodstock. Talk a bit about the scholarship that maybe you relied on, if you want to call it that. But I did want to follow up on the Wavy Gravy story, and that is it known that they were hired to do the security? Is this part of what's
the thing
known about
it,
Woodstock? Because I too didn't know that, and I was stunned by that.
What's interesting about the scholarship or the historiography, if you want to put a highfalutin word on it, Woodstock, it's like kaleidoscopic. You look at it from different angles and you get a totally different story. So there are a number of books about Woodstock, and they tell very different stories. And many of the stories revolve around Michael Lang. Michael Lang has been the sort of hero of Woodstock. That's the guy in the buckskin with the flowing brown hair. And we actually didn't want to tell that story. We felt that A, had been told, and B, kind of, I don't want to disparage Michael, but there's a way in which he draws attention to himself and leaves others who are observing in the shadows. We very quickly felt that Joel and John's story was really the heart of this, because it really captured what Woodstock was. They entered this thing wanting to make money. And over the course of it, something happened to them. They changed. And the spirit of Woodstock filled them. Only way I can say it. And I thought that was a better arc, a more interesting kind of look at what this festival was really about than Michael, who was always kind of a hippie and always had these sort of notions of this sort of pastoral, Aquarian festival. But Joel and John really embodied and personified what this festival was. So in that sense, we chose that angle very specifically, and it kind of influenced everything else we did.
We're making our way around. You in the back.